Welcome to Golf Industry Guru and the Gig Podcast, where we interview the best and brightest golf and hospitality leaders on the planet. On today's episode, you will learn some proven real-world solutions that'll help you and your team solve some of your biggest golf business challenges. So stick around for some tips, tools, and training to get you, your people, and your business powered on. Here's your host, James Cronk.
Well, hello, Golf Industry Guru members, and welcome to another Gig Podcast. And I am thrilled to be back again to share with you some information, some education, some ideas from another guru, another golf industry guru, and someone that has been kind enough to join us today, Jim Taylor of Benchmark 60. He is a fellow British Columbian here in Western Canada. And Jim, thanks so much for joining us today on our podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Jim, you and I got connected through a bunch of mutual connections on LinkedIn. And now in this current day and age, it seems that LinkedIn is an incredibly valuable resource for finding other like-minded individuals. And it's certainly one of my go-to places for finding gurus. And I came across, for your profile, I was fascinated to find out that you're a former Cactus Club guy. And I've told the stories many times before that I used to be a waiter with some of the guys that ended up starting when I was with Earl's Restaurants back in the day, that started some of the restaurants like Cactus or Joey's or Social or Browns and things like that. So you're a restaurateur of some significant experience. Tell me about your journey.
Yeah, well, I was with Cactus for a really long time, and I started with them basically fresh out of high school, kind of by accident. Friends working in the industry and trying to encourage you to come and pick up some shifts or be a server or bartender, that kind of thing. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my career down the road, but ended up having a really good 20-year career with them. And worked all over the country, worked in pretty much every market that organization operates in, and did all kinds of things from being GMs of restaurants to doing the regional management thing and leading a bunch of teams through, a bunch of their growth over the last, decade for sure. Landed in the Lower Mainland late 2000, just before 2000, and kind of, fell in love with it. So I haven't really left much, but, I had really cool experiences with them and learned a lot about the industry, learned a lot about, high growth and how to really manage business. And I consider myself pretty lucky to have had that experience. So, last year pandemics make you do crazy things. So, decided to go out on my own and really wanted to find a way to make a bigger impact on the industry and, broaden my reach and connect with more people and really just try and help the industry recover. So that's kind of what's brought us to where we're at now.
Fantastic. Jim, for those people that are not familiar with Cactus Club or with that restaurant chain, just give a little bit of kind of background about the size and scope.
Sure. Yeah. Well, when I started with Cactus in 99, I think I started with them. I think they had 6 restaurants in Alberta and British Columbia, and they've grown they're over 30 now. They've got 2 or 3 different concepts that they work under. And they're growing like crazy and still, I think, would expect, I don't work with them anymore, obviously, but I would expect that they'll probably continue to grow pretty rapidly. They're definitely a leader in the market, in Canada. So was just, like I said, exposed to some massive restaurants, double-digit $1 million revenue locations, multiple floors, beachfront, all kinds of crazy, really cool opportunities. But they're definitely a leader in the industry in Canada, that's for sure.
And what experience did you kind of take from your time there? What are some of the kind of key takeaways that you feel have kind of helped shape you as a manager, as a restaurateur, as a consultant? Tell me about that.
Well, the first one I think is, I was lucky to be involved, like I said, in a lot of their growth and actually leading the teams that were responsible for new business openings, everything from location finding all the way through to opening teams and actually executing the opening. So that was pretty incredible experience. And like I said, all across the country. The second one, which has actually kind of brought me to where I am in my career now and with Benchmark 60 in my business, is that I got the opportunity to work directly with a team of analysts on basically recreating the entire way of looking at restaurant profitability and food and beverage profitability. And that was when, the Canadian government in different provinces was raising minimum wages, 20, 30%, up to 50% over a few years, up to $15 an hour. And we really had to look at it in a different way in order to stay profitable. So, it started out spending time with a group of analysts, and I kind of joked that I didn't really understand the language they were speaking. And my role evolved to basically being the translator between the analytics team and the operations team, and really, taking that strategy and data and trying to figure out how to implement it into the operations. So it was a really educational time in my career, but it changed the way that I viewed restaurant operations and profit models for sure.
And were these analysts like from outside the industry? Were they number crunchers? Like what kind of analysts?
They were number crunchers. Yeah, they were actually hired on to be part of the profit team. And the profit team at the time was looking at the way that most restaurateurs look at those things, the same way that we'd always looked at it. And these analysts were brought on to look at it differently and to decipher that data and really analyze it in a way that we hadn't looked at it that way before. And like I said, it changed the way that I viewed everything to do with the profit model in food and beverage.
So what were some of the things that the analysts kind of, how did they approach it compared to what a normal restaurant tour guys would approach it, or girls? How did the analysts kind of look at it?
Well, traditionally, I mean, as you probably know, and anyone who's in F&B that might be listening to this, traditionally, hospitality looks at everything as a percentage of sales. And whether that's food cost or labor cost or, really down to anything. And the challenge that they posed in front of us, and the biggest learning for me, was that the percentage of sales is a result. It's not a strategy. And once you see the result, or once you get that percentage, it's already happened. And so, that was really an eye opener for me, because I remember running shifts as a manager or being a GM and talking to my management about what was going on with the profit or the labor cost on any given shift. And they never could really tell me what was happening. And I never really had a good answer either. It was just a target that was set by someone in accounting, and we tried to hit it, and it gets a little scary when wages go up, or, my biggest fear in hospitality is when wages go up, the easiest way to make that labor target is just to cut staff. And so they introduced us to ways of looking at data that was more proactive, and that was actually able to help us predict what was going to happen based on real information that had always been right under our nose. We just never knew how to read it or understand it.
Mm. And so is that kind of what you do now with Benchmark 60?
Yeah. So Benchmark 60 now is based around that same sort of practice of deciphering the data and really looking at it in a way that actually strips away all the variables that make things like being profitable or labor cost management or whatever that might be. It actually strips away the variables that make that more challenging. So when we inject some strategies into a business, it actually makes the management's job easier. They have less to focus on, and they can spend more time on service.
So tell me about, so obviously our members are going to have, all kinds of different sizes of restaurant parts of their business, of their golf club, right? So there's going to be, a club that's got a 100-seat restaurant and a 300-seat banquet facility, and a club that's got 30 chairs and a picnic table out back, and they're all kind of different. What are some of the kind of core fundamentals that you think every golf club owner, manager, needs to at least be aware of? If you were going to kind of identify the factors that influence your business, what are some of those things that in your experience are critical?
Well, the focus that we spend all of our time on is around productivity and actually piecing together pieces of data that tell us and give us a really good idea and a good metric that tells us how productive the business might be in any given category, whether that's service, labor cost, kitchen or back of house labor cost, or even management. And it's hard enough in a regular full service restaurant to predict those things when you've got pretty consistent business happening. But in a golf club, it's even harder because you've got a la carte things, or you've got banquets, you've got all these different, different types of service that happen on a regular basis. And, you and I have discussed in the past that, it's very much viewed as an amenity in lots of scenarios, right? And so I think the interesting thing about it is that whether it's a la carte or whether it's banquet or whether it's a full service restaurant like Earl's or Cactus Club or one of those mainstream restaurants, the thing that remains the same is that there is data available of what has actually happened and therefore likely what will happen. And when we start to look at those things, we can actually improve the productivity in the business. So whether it's 3 picnic tables out on the lawn behind the 18th green, or whether it's a full service $3 million a year food and beverage program, the information that we have is still the same. And so we can actually piece it together in a way that creates a metric and will actually give us a number of how productive the business is. And then you can start to leverage that and you can work on improving it.
So what are some of the things, what are some of the steps that an operator would do if they wanted to make their food and beverage operation more productive, as you say?
Right. So, the pieces of information that we encourage operators to look at are things like, how many guests are you serving on a regular basis? There are things like, what's the average that a guest might spend? And that's a fairly normal piece of information. And it gets skewed even more in golf clubs because someone might come into the restaurant, a member, and just order water, right? And have no bill at all. But over time, there's a reason why it's called average guest spend. And there's a reason why it's, number of covers can average out over a given day or a given week, and that kind of thing. So when we start to look at what those averages do, we can predict over time how many covers you're going to serve this week or this month or this quarter or whatever season, whatever that might be. We know from historicals and from that data that we can look at what the average spend of a person is. It doesn't mean that every person's going to spend that, but it means that there's, like we said, some historicals. And then we encourage the operators to look at it in terms of actually more related to how many guests you're going to serve as opposed to how many dollars you're going to generate. Because if the example that I always talk to people about is if you had one customer coming in to your restaurant today and you were the manager, you probably wouldn't schedule any service staff. You'd probably take care of them yourself. If you had 10 people coming in, you might need one staff member to help you with them. If you had 100 or 200 guests coming in, you'd need far more staff to serve those people. But we still haven't talked about what they're going to spend. It's more about approaching it from a service perspective. And once you do that, then you can actually leverage productivity on how many people you need to serve a specific number of customers. And the spend part averages out over time. So once we start to see those averages come out, we can reverse engineer it and start to predict really accurately what will happen in the future.
Got it. And so that's based on is it based on making your people more productive or having them sell more dessert or a combination of both?
Well, it's really not even about sales, to be honest. It's more about the number of people that each staff member helps to serve. So we create a metric that actually gives us a score on how productive the store is or the restaurant is. And then, like I said, once we have that number, we can start to leverage it and we can start to, play with what that service model looks like. But the idea is that people get sometimes confused about the difference between efficiency and productivity. Efficiency is doing more with less, which means cut staff, less people in the kitchen, try and have people work harder. Productivity is actually about doing more with the same. And so it's actually about getting better at, that one staff member, if they're a server in the dining room, actually getting better at making sure they maximize the number of people they can help. In the back of house, making sure that every time, every minute of the day, some people are productive. And we can actually measure that through that score.
And so are there some standards then from a productivity standpoint? I need one server for every 12 tables in a section. I mean, we used to have this conversation back in the day. It's like, if you got a rock star server, the idea was to have 5 rock stars on instead of 10 mediocre people, because 5 rock stars can handle double the amount of tables. And You're paying obviously half the amount of labor wages. They're making double the amount of tips because they're a rock star. They're happier. You're happier. And if the customer is still happy, then you've got a win-win-win. Is it as simple as that?
It It is in some ways, but it actually creates more of a consistency across the playing field. So if you think that, you might have those rock stars that can only work certain days of the week, right? And you might find that your productivity score goes up when those people are working. But what you don't find is the adverse effect, where when we're looking at that score and using that data, when the non-rock stars are working, you still make sure and you can still be very productive, because we know exactly what we're looking at. From the average number of customers served means we need an X number of people. And then if you can, like I said, once you start to see that information, it helps make decisions on where you can push harder and where you need to be careful. But in terms of your question about, is there a certain standard? The best part about it is that there's no compare my business to someone else's business. There's no my golf club versus your golf club, or my restaurant versus your restaurant. It really just helps them focus on improving their own business, and really what happened last week or what happened yesterday. And the beauty of the productivity concept in hospitality, in food and beverage, is you can break it down by position, by day of the week, by time of day, by month, by year, by week, by really anything. There's a million different ways to look at it. And so we can actually go into a food and beverage operation and take a look at some of the data that exists, plug it in, and we can actually say, you're losing money on Tuesday nights between 5 and 8 in your service position, or your kitchen is least productive Wednesday mornings between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. And we can actually break it down by position.
What are the factors that would identify that you're least productive at between 5 and 8? Is because what, your dollar guest count goes down, or because your number of covers? What is it that you would measure?
Well, a lot of hospitality venues use things like meals per man hour or dollars per man hour from a back of house perspective.
Yes.
And so basically, from a kitchen perspective, it starts with that piece of information, but we just go further, because just looking at meals per man hour or the number of work hours that they think they're allowed to use in order to hit their labor target, that really, all it is a target for scheduling. It doesn't give them the information they need to get better. And so when we attach the metric, which involves things more like what the customers, how many customers are actually going to serve on a given day, using historical data. We can involve the guest spend if we want to, but don't have to. We look at the number of people that they have working, how many hours they would typically work, and the relationship between all that information. Then you can start to leverage the score. And so, an example might be that a restaurant would serve 4 covers per 1 staff member hour worked. And we usually try to encourage or look for somewhere between a 5 and 8% improvement in productivity. And if you think about going from 4 to 4.1 as a score, it doesn't seem like much. But a 5% improvement in productivity on a $2 million food and beverage business is about $65,000 a year in savings.
In labor savings?
In labor savings.
Got it.
And again, that's the concept, is about doing more with the same. So it's actually $65,000 to the bottom line. It's not doing more with less people. So we're not diminishing service. We're not changing the model. We're not spending less time with guests. It's just about actually leveraging productivity.
Okay, and so just walk me through that if I'm not a restaurant expert. So more with the same. Well, that $65,000 has come from somewhere. So if you're paying the same amount for labor, where's the productivity? How does productivity get generated in dollars?
So it can be lots of different things. I mean, it can be productivity. That productivity score is, in the simplest way to put it, is a relationship between how many covers you serve and how many service hours or kitchen hours you use. And so if you serve one guest more and use the same number of hours, essentially your labor cost as a percentage would go down.
Right.
If you use a portion less hours and serve the same number of guests, as long as it doesn't affect your service, in theory, again, your labor cost percentage would go down. So we leverage the relationship between the number of guests served and the number of hours worked to fit with the service model that the venue is looking for. And then again, we try to tweak and find ways. Maybe it's 15 minutes here or there for each person. Maybe it's start times. Maybe it's hours of operation on weekends or days that they aren't as busy. There's lots of different strategies that we implement to look at it. Maybe it's making sure that there's 4 customers in every table for 4 and not putting a group of 2 in a table for 4, because you can't maximize the number of people you're going to serve if you do that. There's lots of those little strategies that we implement with the team that they can focus on service and not have to worry about the labor costs, because we know that over time, the reason that will work out is that averages will always be averages. They'll always be the same.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's fascinating. How do you do? So, sometimes when I go into a club, I have a difficult time just for them to understand plugging into the point of sale system the number of customers, that are sitting at the table. Or I love when they come to the table with the auction. It's like, who had the burger and who had the pasta? It's like, you should know who's sitting in seat number 1 and seat number 2, for goodness sakes. So obviously there's some training there as well and getting kind of sophisticated. Does this work with only sophisticated operations that have got all this kind of data, or can you apply these same concepts to a mom and pop restaurant that doesn't, I'm not saying they don't have a point of sale system, but maybe they're struggling with keeping kind of that information going on a regular basis?
Yeah, the training strategies all would apply no matter what. And, we could go into a business, and we have done this with businesses in the past, where we start with step 2 first. And that is training the team on how to get the result without actually looking at the metric first.
Right.
But the thing that we find in almost every case is that you don't need a lot of data to do it. It's 4 pieces of information. And we always tell our clients that if we have 2 weeks worth of information, we can start to leverage it. Mm-hmm. So as long as they know how many hours their people are working, how many customers they're serving, what those customers might be spending, and how much they're paying their staff, we've got enough information to make a difference.
That's fascinating. That's cool. What Jim, in your kind of travels these days with all that's going on and the clients that you work with, I know you work with lots of different restaurant chains and lots of different kind of clubs and clients. Mm-hmm. What are you hearing from people about the increase in minimum wage, the challenges to the bottom line? Obviously the restaurant sector has been drastically impacted, certainly by the pandemic, and now are coming out of it in many parts of the world. But what are some of the things that you're seeing and hearing?
Well, I felt like a bit of a victim when I went through this originally and had to start paying my people $15 an hour in Western Canada, because it was a real challenge to try to figure out that profit model when wages went up that high. And now looking back, it actually, this whole concept of looking at things differently was born through that. And, I see a lot of opportunity, and, hopefully this doesn't frustrate any of the US listeners, but the labor shortage that's happening in the US right now is largely driven to the fact that wages are so low in hospitality and people can stay home and make as much, if not more. Yes. And so, a lot of the conversation that I'm having with clients in the US right now is strategically about how do we raise your wages to a point where you will actually be able to use it as a competitive advantage, attract and retain people, sometimes even higher quality than you had before, and then reverse engineer through productivity actually to make sure that your profit model doesn't change. So, it was when this originally happened back 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was, government regulated wages were going up. And what I find now is that's happening a lot with a lot of our clients is that they're doing it by choice as a way to attract the best possible people. And then we're injecting some strategy around productivity to make sure that their profit model doesn't change. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But it's definitely, the labor model in golf clubs. Sometimes it's almost twice as high percentage wise as what a full service mainstream restaurant might be.
Yes.
And so, there's incredible opportunity. I try not to use the word savings because it's really not savings. It's just running the operation a little bit differently. And so there's incredible opportunity in terms of the golf club food and beverage business to improve productivity. You just have to know how to read the information that's in front of us.
Yeah, it's so true. And what I like about what you and I have chatted about this before, and we've had some conversations prior to today about what you're doing and about productivity. And what I do like about it very much, Jim, is that so many golf club operators, especially clubs that have members or members and guests or semi-private or fully private. I mean, we have this kind of historical expectation of this is the number of people that we have on a Friday. You know, this is, you know, Betty and Susie and Bill and Tom, they always work on Saturday mornings, and you know, this opens when and and we need to have 27 different types of coolers, you know, because everyone wants their own flavor. I mean, the reality is that if you want to improve your bottom line, or you want to improve even the club's experience, or if you want to improve the staff's experience, you have to look at different ways of doing things, and every business has to evolve. What I'm interested by what I've learned in you and Benchmark 60 is it's really a different way of looking at labor cost, improving food cost, improving labor cost, you know, increasing sales. You know, I mean, you know, productivity is we look at productivity on how to maximize the golf course. It's no different than looking at productivity to maximize the restaurant, maximize the experience, right? I mean, we have marshals and starters and GPS and tag marshal and various different ways to determine how to maximize the tee sheet and rounds of golf. It should be no different than kind of maximizing our productivity within the food and beverage operation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you know, it's actually a lot more simple, I think, than most operators really realize. It's just a different way of looking at. And you're right. I mean, the food and beverage business, in my opinion, is evolving all the time, and there's innovation happening all the time. You know, you look at what happens in the, you know, the major markets that have some of the leading restaurants in the world. The food is evolving all the time. The beverage is evolving all the time. The design of restaurants is evolving all the time. And, you know, in my opinion, the one thing that's behind in terms of food and beverage in the industry as a whole, golf clubs and you know, mainstream full service restaurants, is how they view the operation of the business from a data analytics, information. You know, we're behind in our industry. So it poses a good opportunity.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Jim, how would someone reach out to you and get in touch with you and learn more about what you do?
Well, I think they can get a hold of me one way or another through you guys.
100%.
But, you know, definitely spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and try to make sure I'm well connected that way. We have a website, benchmark60.com. info@benchmark60.com is the email address that they would use that way. And, you know, a big part of what we're trying to do is just, you know, encourage the industry to evolve and like we just said, you know, innovate and find new ways to do things, because, you know, I believe there is a more sustainable financial future for hospitality, be it in golf clubs or full service cafes, whatever it might be, so that this type of thing with COVID-19 doesn't happen again to our industry.
Yeah, it's certainly been devastating. There's no doubt about it. Is 60 relevant to the process? Is it like 60 days or?
Yeah, so there's two different ways that we would deliver that that sort of education piece to a client. One is that originally the platform was designed that it's a 60-day process that we go through. So the first week or so, typically we would start out with what we call concept clarity and just try to get really a really good understanding of what type of experience they're trying to offer their customer, whether that's member only, whether that's, you know, a public golf club, whatever that might be. Because the last thing we're going to do is go in there and tell people they have to change their service model, or in order to be profitable, you got to change everything. That's not how we operate.
Right.
So the first entry level is about that concept clarity. And then we spend a couple of weeks actually looking at the information that's available and creating some benchmarks, no pun intended, some benchmarks for the business around what's actually happening. Once we have that information all together, we do two things. We start to tweak what's happening in the business, work with the client to tweak what's happening in the business to start to change that score a little bit. And we work with the operations team in terms of how they work in terms of service in the business, how they deal with clients, all of that type of thing. And then we spend the last week or two, depending how long the client wants to take to go through that process, we spend the last week or two optimizing. So we'll look at it and say, okay, what if we tried to crank this up a little bit? Or what if we maybe need to dial this back a little? Because again, we're not about trying to change the service model. It's more about being more productive. So that's the platform version of it. What we also do now is a more boutique approach to it as well, though, where we work more individually, one-on-one with clients, where it's not in so much of a course setup. And we spend more time actually working with the operations management, GM, whoever it might be, director, so that they have a better understanding of how to do this long-term in their business.
Right. Fantastic.
The boutique way would also apply if there was a group that had multiple courses and they want to take what implemented in one and apply it in other facilities. Right.
And apply it around. That's awesome, Jim. I mean, I as I said, I think it's really interesting for our operators, for our listeners. I wrote down a bunch of notes, but I mean, one of them is just to really understand what drives the bottom line or what improvements you can make to your club, and looking at it in a different way, and looking at it with new metrics, with new measurements, with new processes, and that there's different ways of getting to the same outcome. I love, you talk about the fact of minimum wages increased. We can't take our menu prices up 50%. I mean, we can take it up a little bit, but we certainly can't take it up 50%. And we've got to find new ways to obviously operate in this new world, certainly in Canada with minimum wage, and other parts of North America are also coming along as well. And we've got clients in other parts of the world that have their own labor challenges. But I encourage our listeners to reach out to Jim Taylor and Benchmark 60, find him on LinkedIn. We'll have some articles and documents and some other templates and possibly a webinar and a course coming up with Jim on Golf Industry Guru. And Jim, it's been a pleasure having you as my guest today on our Gig podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Gig Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and mostly that you learned a few things that will help you improve your business. Join us next time as we continue to bring you the best and brightest golf and hospitality leaders on the planet. Thanks for listening.